Sometimes as a reader, especially if you're at the beginning of your development, it might feel a little bit overwhelming to do readings for others because maybe you feel like you get really overwhelmed by, let's say, the emotions that come up or the heavy topics. And you feel like it's easy to get swept up in, let's say, the sadness or whatever it is that's coming up. So I thought I'd share just my own tips for how to navigate that in a reading and how to keep your energy clear and how to not get swept up in those deeper emotions. My first tip is to keep your vibration and energy high going into a reading. So this means making sure that when you're going into a reading, you have shifted yourself into a state of joy and love so that you're coming into it feeling wonderful yourself. And as you come into your reading, it's going to be a lot harder for kind of those heavier emotions, let's say, to then push you off balance. So making sure that you're not going into a session feeling low yourself or feeling bad about certain things. If you have stuff that comes up in your life, I know we all have to live lives even if we do readings. Let's say you have random things come up in your life where you're feeling low or for whatever reason you're dealing with kind of difficult things in your life, but you still have to go do readings. So it's helpful to do something that's going to help shift your energy so that you're going into your readings feeling at least neutral, but even better than that, feeling joyful and positive and upbeat. You might do that in a few different ways. Meditation might do that for some people. Sometimes it's not enough though. So for me, meditation doesn't really necessarily get me into that joyful, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed sort of feeling. So I might do something else that kind of gets me into that state. So I like to sometimes put on guilty pleasure music, dance around to that, do something silly. All those things kind of help shift my energy. Other people might like to go for a walk or do something else where they can kind of get energy moving in their body to help push them into that state. My second tip is to work through your own shit in your life. And this is kind of one of these things that takes time. And this is something that kind of you do over a period of years where you are working on your own development, you're working on your own stuff in life and working through your own shit. Let's say kind of clearing any unresolved anger, any grudges, any low self-esteem, all those things. Working through those and clearing them up really helps because when you go to do a reading for another person, let's say they're dealing with something like a really strong grudge or some kind of unresolved anger, and you are dealing with very similar things in your life, it could trigger your own stuff and that could make their things feel very overwhelming to you and push you off balance in the session. It also makes it a little bit harder to stay objective. So working through your own stuff in your life, that really does help. My other tip is during a session to accept, acknowledge, and thank the energy that you're feeling. Let's say you're doing a psychic reading for someone and you're connecting to the energy and you're all of a sudden feeling a little bit overwhelmed by, let's say, the grief that they're going through or the depression that they're going through, and you're feeling that as if it's your own and it's starting to feel overwhelming to you. Usually, it really helps just to acknowledge and accept and thank the energy. So really what the energy is doing is it's just showing itself to you. And you don't need to experience it anymore if you acknowledge it and say that this is what you're feeling, because then it has described itself to you and you can release it and you can move on in the reading. So it really just helps to tell the person what you're experiencing, saying it out loud, acknowledging anything and everything that's coming up there. Now, sometimes it can be really difficult even after you said that this is what you're feeling, because maybe you're still feeling overwhelmed by it. Just being honest with the client that this is what you're dealing with, maybe telling them that you're feeling overwhelmed by the emotions coming up and you're just taking a moment to work through that, that also helps you work through it. So as you're saying to your client, I'm just kind of feeling a lot of this grief energy, or I'm feeling a lot of the sadness. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it, so I'm just going to take a moment to work through it. As you're saying that out loud, you're setting the intention to work through it, and that's helping you actually work through it. So just the act of talking actually helps you move through the energy. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by the emotions coming up, let's say, and you're just kind of sitting there feeling it and you're not saying what you're feeling, that makes it really hard to get that energy moving out of you, and so that you can kind of continue in the reading. So you want to make sure that you're continuing to talk and not holding things in. And my last tip is to work on boundaries, and this is another tip that kind of takes a little while maybe, but as you work on strengthening your own boundaries, really for me, how I like to describe boundaries is having strong boundaries is the same as having a strong sense of self-worth. So if you have strong boundaries, you know you are worthy of not having to deal with other people's stuff, other people's shit, other people's emotions, other people's things. You are worthy of going through life and just dealing with your own stuff and just feeling your own things and not having to feel other people's stuff all the time or having to process other people's stuff all the time. So working on boundaries helps you keep a bit more of a distance to the energy that you're reading in a session. And that can really, really help. So if you can work on your own ideas of self-worth and the fact that you are worthy of being able to do a session without having to feel overwhelmed by it, that helps a lot. So those are my tips for doing this, or for navigating that sort of thing in a reading. Maybe you have your own tips which you would like to share in the comments.